Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel, welcome to my review of Survival Fountain of Youth. Boy, have I really enjoyed this. We did an overview a few days ago and I've kind of just been hoovering this up at the moment, but to front load, I think it's absolutely worth your time, worth your money. On that, there is only one objective standard that I hold to when I review. It's a little unusual in that for every $5 Australian a game asks me, I ask it gives me a good hour of solid gameplay fun. This is intentionally a relatively low bar to weed out stuff that's probably objectively not worth your time. So anything past that is value add. And this being $40 Australian or whatever, that would be 8 hours. I've put 8 hours into it now. And I'm going to put more into it as well. This game has really held me. I've actually got a satisfying bit of a half journey out of my time with it so far, and I'm very curious where it goes. So there seems to be many hours as well still left to go. It's not outstaying its welcome. The gameplay loop is not over grinding or anything like that, which is something you might worry about going to a survival craft type game. So suffice to say, it's actually very well rounded, very balanced, and there was not a single moment where it ever felt like a drag, but you did have that sort of overwhelming sense of what am I going to do next? A lot of thinking and planning and spinning plates, but not really stressed out. Almost moving in slow motion, as it were. You might be suffering from a snake bite poisoning that's getting worse. Now, that's a problem and it needs to be dealt with and it's relatively urgent, but we're not talking quick time 30 seconds urgent. We're talking plan the rest of that day. All right, what are we going to do now? All right, we might have to, all right, we know where scorpions spawn in that cave because they're a pest. We'll go across there, we'll kill a couple of scorpions, mash them up, bring them back across the island. We want to avoid the jackals, and we've mapped all that out already. I'm going to probably need drinking water for the trip as well. Okay, cool, so we'll check that out. Maybe need some coconuts. We'll come back, we'll turn the scorpion into antidote, but we'll need broadleaf as well. Okay, cool. So you can do that, or likewise, maybe it's gonna go beyond the sort of timer, the timer related to an injury, since we're using this as an example. At the expiration of it, it has a worsen or self-repair, self-natural healing percentage assigned to it, and this is affected greatly by like your current water and food and fatigue levels. So if you're rested and you look after yourself, maybe that's the play. It's like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get the antidote in my system before that ticks over. So maybe we spend a day resting. Maybe I rest up, I eat well, I get a bit of bed rest, and I try and out heal the poison. And sometimes it just goes away. And this is only one thing. Like you can accidentally cut yourself doing basic activities, and it's very rare. But even in those hours, it's happened probably half a dozen times or something like that. And so it's very balanced. That it's not an oppressive, you're constantly injured and stuffed, but it is one of those things that if you disregard and you're belligerent about any of this, it will compound. And there was a point where I ended up on a bit of a mini adventure relatively early in the piece before I really started to get a grasp of this island and what's going on. Now I'm a bit more familiar with it. Dare I say I've mastered it, and I don't even want to talk about spoilers and where the story goes, but it's bigger than that. But I ended up getting basically hounded around the island and stumbling ever forward, circumnavigating it, looking for stuff. And it was one of those things, the only way out was through. I was already that committed and I was poisoned and it degraded. And I think it went to tier 4 of poisoning and I was just so fucked. And I managed to nurse my way back to health. But my God, like it really generated some great kind of survival cinematic experiences. I don't know how else to describe it. It's emergent storytelling at its absolute peak, and while it does have this underpinning story, that's not really the focus. It's very interesting, like there's an ancient tribe remains and there's murals telling a story about the fountain of life, which is what you're here for. We covered this in the overview, but to retread a little bit, you're shipwrecked, basically just a random sailor on one of the 3 exploring galleons, and you're sort of just following the breadcrumb trails of trying to find survivors and figure out what's going on. And it is interesting, don't get me wrong, it's very interesting and intriguing, but I would argue incredibly complementary to a game that is very much gameplay first, which I would argue most games should be. Since we're on the topic of narrative, you know, a lot of what AAA is trying to do these days is make it story first with gameplay second. And I fucking hate that, and that's why I hate the Game Awards and all that in general. It's so masturbatory trying to pretend they're the Academy Awards. There is always a space for a good story, but it should always be second fiddle to a game. Otherwise, why even make it a game? But I digress. The story here is good. You could say serviceable, but it's better than most, and it's actually quite intriguing. Good little sort of carrot on a stick. But yeah, fighting against nature and your survival bars, kind of perfectly balanced. There are animals and, you know, I mentioned jackals, but, you know, you get swooped by bloody eagles and all that sort of stuff. And I don't want to, because there's not a lot of variety, there is enough. But I feel like if they put too much in there, it would have been overwhelming, because now it's becoming graspable. I know where things are. I know how to deal with things. Dare I say, the way that the experience curve works is sort of like the phenomenon of when Souls-like games came on the scene, where it was less about you've got 10 XP points to get to level 2 or whatever, and it's more about actual real hands-on experience, learning move sets and all that sort of stuff. That's kind of what I see the core of what makes Dark Souls good, is that you can master it. The XP goes beyond a stat sheet. And that's sort of how this feels as well. I'm starting to really get my head around basically all the moving parts, and you become more and more confident. And in a way, the island becomes smaller, which is kind of cool. So yeah, you're following the story, you're doing your best, going from humble beginnings. I guess the one point of frustration, I sort of moved bases at a point. Like you set up an early base in a cave. That's probably what most people will do because the story takes you there. But then I followed in the footsteps of my captain, and ended up basically setting up where he set up in this sort of little key on the other side of the island. And it was one of those things, transporting everything across is a bit of a nightmare, so I basically just restarted. And because lessons were learned, I was up and running in about a quarter of the time. But it's still one of those things, you know, you're juggling, you're going to have good runs and bad runs, and you'll be at days where you'll be on death's door, there'll be no rain or anything like that, the coconuts are running out, you know, getting fresh water becomes more and more of a headache. And some of the encounters can be incredibly lethal as well. Boars are a real bloody boss creature as well, you got to be careful fighting them. Like if you intentionally go up against one, you want to be full health. And to be full health, you've probably got to rest up for a couple of days. But yeah, it's one of those things. Oh man, you really have to think about it. Like there is a sort of tactical and strategic layer to playing this game. Again, it's not going to break the bank, and don't be scared off by it. But it really does, to me, it channels, you know, that sort of mouthfeel of something like that movie Castaway, right? Where it's like, well, I'm on my own. I'm going to be here for a while. I need to come up with plans. But fortunately, it doesn't lose the thread. You know, to use Sons of the Forest as an example, I don't particularly like that game, but I also recognize that it's very, very popular in the sort of mainstream, so I know I'm on the wrong side of that. But humor me as I explain, that and The Forest and many other sort of multiplayer survival buildcraft games, they generally seem more interested in being a bit of a sandbox by here's the tools, here's all the things you can build, and they're not really balanced per se. Like there's a lot of 90% of the shit you can build in Sons of the Forest isn't that helpful or applicable. It's more that you can, and maybe even just designed for busy work for multiplayer. Maybe you've got the fourth dude in the lobby that's not really doing anything. And because that's also offset, I'm not trying to bash that game, but I'm trying to use this to highlight why I like this and not so much that. But things like your actual survival craft components are non-issue. Even if the game didn't constantly give you food and water items, your bars basically don't drain at all. Now granted, its focus is a little bit different, you know, more wave defense and all that sort of stuff, but my point is that I find myself getting a little bit bored and meandering because there's not a lot of pressure put on you in not just that game, but a lot of the ones that go more into the multiplayer realm. Whereas this plays a lot closer to Long Dark, but not nearly as hardcore. I know Green Hell will be a touchstone that many would probably use. Honestly, I've only played a little bit of that. I really should go back. It's a bit of a blind spot in my history. I liked what I played of it. So I would probably say from afar, probably safe to say if you like Green Hell, you would like this. But yeah, an absolute delight. And it sort of engrossed me and captured me, but without being like some sort of overstimulated, super high dopamine modern pull. There is kind of a persistent, I wouldn't even call it slow burn, but like a persistent mid burn that really kept me quite engrossed. And as the hours ticked by, because I keep an eye on the clock and all that, it was one of those blink and you didn't realize that time had gone by. You sort of just got really sucked into it. So it's one of those things I could see people accidentally playing till like 3 a.m, just planning away and triaging on your list of 10 things to do, which one should you do next. It's very quite engaging and challenging and satisfying. Anyway, at this point I'm just gushing. You should check it out, especially if you're not really someone given to this sort of genre. As covered, like I'm a bit cagey about some of it because I feel like in the crafting, survival crafting, building space, a lot of the learnings that companies kind of try and strike gold with and emulate and develop into aren't really things that appeal to me that much. So yeah, it was wonderful to play this and find that, at least for me, the balance seems to be absolutely spot on. So check it out if you're a bit cagey about these sort of games, or maybe you've been burnt before. All right, team, much as leave it there for the time being. I'll catch you guys on the next one.